Why, hello! I haven't been here for quite some time, and I believe there have been quite a few changes in my absence. It was not my fault. The book we chose I will explain the book we chose. And also, we have just been so busy. The idea of reading an 18th century novel has just been a little bit beyond us lately. So, nevertheless, I am here, as promised, that I would be back this year. I think perhaps that my appearances might be a little more, not so frequent, simply because we've run out of books that we've already read. Yes. So I'm having to read them anew, and that is the cause of part of the delay, because I'll explain with the book. So this week we are talking about Charlotte Lennox's book, The Female Quixote. But before we start, please take a moment to have a look at our shop. Our Redbubble shop has a load of things. That's a new thing since I arrived. And of course we have books, actually published books since I have been away. So there are lots of new things for me to catch up on. And if you haven't had a look, try that yourself. Okay. So, Charlotte Lennox, The Female Quixote. What can I say? Okay, so this is a book from the 1850s. Charlotte Lennox is one of the women that, when I talked about Samuel Johnson had championed several women authors. This is one of them. This author, Charlotte Lennox. She is a Scottish writer, or she's included in the Scottish. She's also included in the American writers because her father was a soldier. She was actually born in Gibraltar. And she also spent some time in America while her father was stationed there as a child. But by the time she was writing in England, and so her novels are very English. So, The Female Quixote is modelled after or echoing Don Quixote, obviously, the Spanish novel by Cervantes about Don Quixote, who has spent so much of his time reading medieval romances that he now imagines himself to be a knight and goes out and, plunges at windmills and saves gypsy women. I don't think we're supposed to say gypsy anymore. Romany women. But anyway, he goes out and saves people, imagining them to be princesses or damsels in distress, and windmills as dragons. We all know Don Quixote, followed around by his poor Sancho Panza, who has to deal with all this mess that his master creates. Well, in The Female Quixote, we meet Arabella, whose father has left court. He's a marquis, so he's somebody with a great deal of title and influence. But he has left court, and his wife and retired to the country. He has obviously been retired to the country for nearly 20 years, and his only daughter, Arabella, his wife having died, I suspect fairly soon after Arabella's birth, I think, has been brought up in country seclusion with only her mother's collection of romance novels from France from the earlier century to occupy her mind with. I will tell you now, the Marquis is one of the most neglectful parents outside of Mr. Bennet. Yes, you heard me right. Mr. Bennet, lovely Mr. Bennet, is a terribly neglectful parent. That's why his poor wife is losing her mind over having 5 daughters, none of whom are married, because he hasn't done what he needs to do as a father. And she is now freaking out in case he dies. Because he's probably hit about, his late 40s, 50s, and people died at that age. So, Mr. Bennet is a terribly neglectful father. So is the Marquis. He has had his daughter brought up in this seclusion. She has had no company other than servants, and she's had no society. So he has not had other members of the country elite visit him. He has not had family visit him. He has been incredibly neglectful of his daughter's upbringing in that way, so that she has no idea how a young lady is supposed to behave. So all her models of virtue and decorum and the way that one behaves come from these dreadful, dreadful romance novels of her mother's. She has absolutely no idea how a young lady in the mid-18th century is supposed to behave. Her father introduces her to his nephew, Mr. Gladville. Mr. Gladville ends up taking on the role more or less of poor old Sancho Panza, who's forced to follow around behind his completely deluded master. Well, Mr. Glanville is forced to follow around behind his completely deluded Arabella. So the Marquis would like Arabella to marry her cousin. These are first cousins. This is part of the reason this whole world collapsed. You can't do that without it all ending up like the Habsburgs and dribbling into your shoes. I'm just saying. It's what happens. In order to keep wealth together, they married too close. And then all of a sudden you can't have children, can you? No. And then all the estates get broken up. Happened to the Romans, happened to the aristocracy in a lot of places, and happened to these people keeping all that money together. Not a good idea. Share the wealth. Anyway, so she decides, according to the rules of the books that she has been reading, that if somebody is presented to one as a lover who has the approval of one's parents, you should instantly take a dislike to them. This is a slight problem because Mr. Gladville takes an instant liking to his cousin and endeavours to do whatever he possibly can to be worthy of her, short of actually being the kind of hero in the novels that she reads. He would like he's trying some way to bring his beloved back to a level of sanity, because she makes chaos. She causes absolute chaos. She believes a gardener is a disguised gentleman in love with her. She takes a gentleman who sees her at church and thinks she looks striking. She thinks he's going to carry her off. Everything. So many things. The Marquis dies. And her uncle is a lot less indulgent of her silliness than her father was, and he just has no idea what to make of these fantastical notions of his niece. While she is in mourning, she decides to spend her mourning period at home in the country before going on to London and Bath. She is visited and has stay with her cousins. So Mr. Gladville, who desperately wants to spend time with her because he loves her, and his sister, Miss Gladville. While they're in the country, they meet Sir George, who is actually a school friend of Mr. Gladville. And Sir George is also taken with Arabella, and he has more knowledge than Mr. Gladville of these romantic stories, and he encourages her. Not what you should do. It makes chaos. She causes absolute chaos around her, to the point that she causes fights between these two friends, which results in Mr. Gladville actually injuring him with his sword, and in fear of being pursued by pursuers, who happen to be three men riding in the park where her and the other ladies are, throws herself into the Thames in imitation of one of her heroines to swim the Thames as this heroine had swum the Tiber. She immediately catches cold and is brought home with a fever. After which, once Sir George is discovered to be out of danger and confesses that he had done this because he loved Arabella, at which, yes, I'll forgive you, but I'm never trusting you again, you bastard! Especially after I told you to help me not get her out of this, because this is ridiculous. She's making herself ridiculous, and she's made herself ridiculous now in town, and so, you know, it was one thing in the country. This was worse, and you made her worse. Thank you very much. I'm not trusting you again. Mr. Gladwell is very, very put upon. He's very much the Sancho Panza in this story. Poor fellow. Incredibly devoted to her, but not conforming to her rigorous standards. Poor man. Anyway, she recovers from her fever and is forced to see through the ministrations of the minister that the books are fiction, the books are absurd, and what's more, provoking men to violence for your own vanity is a criminal act. And she repents, and she and Mr. Gladwell marry, and Sir George and Miss Gladwell, who has fancied Sir George all this time, and whom Sir George, if he recovers from his injuries, has promised to marry, marries her. Okay? That is the story in a nutshell. This story is unbelievably fatiguing to read. It has too many words and too little plot. If it had more plot, it would be worthy of the number of words. If it had less words, it would be worthy of the plot. It is... Combine that with the fact that Arabella speaks in such a confected manner, you find yourself reading it and having to pay an awful lot of attention to dialogue that means nothing. I mean, it's not that Charlotte Lennox has written a bad book. I'm not saying it's a bad book. I'm saying it is an incredibly fatiguing book. She has done very, very well in imitating the style of these earlier romance novelists in the dialogue of Arabella. But as a reader, I want to throttle the stupid little cow. She is a nitwit. She causes absolute chaos around her, which, yes, is funny to a certain point, but the way she uses language, it's like being on an Instagram scroll. So that, and where you're not paying attention, you're just being bombarded with content after content after content after content, only to realize there was nothing in there to satisfy. So there are whole chapters where she's blathering on about something that if somebody had just said, shut up, listen to me and stop, that vicar at the end, I wanted that vicar to turn up a lot earlier. I wanted her father to bring the vicar to cure her of her stupidity after she turns down Mr. Glanville. Because it's not charming or fun in the way that, say, Sophia Weston goes on adventures because I will not marry Mr. Bliffle, and ends up going to London. But there's so much in that story. Look at Tom Jones has multiple plots running. It's a picaresque. This is a picaresque. But it has so many things happening and is so crammed full of adventures. You don't care. You're sitting on the edge of your seat because, like Dickens, another writer of huge plots and huge books, is you have a tendency to leave you dangling by a rope over a pit of crocodiles that's on, and the rope's on fire at the end of every chapter. So you're like, yay, there's the dangling over a rope is, oh, she's misunderstood someone again. Oh, it is incredibly fatiguing. It is so... I've read difficult books. I've read very difficult books. I've read Ulysses, I've read War and Peace, I've read Patrick White. None of them are as difficult as this book purely because of the fatigue. Your head is buzzing. I am not going to be capable of reading anything for the next couple of days because of this, because my head is buzzing so hard with this. I'm going to sit there and watch silent films. I don't want any more words. I'm like, no, yes, let's watch someone wreck a train. Yes, let's do that. Let's watch someone wreck a train. Because I can't take any more words at this point. There are too many. I like listening to podcasts and interviews and things. I couldn't listen to anything this morning once I'd finished this book. I'm like, please stop. Please, no more words. I'm going to have to go and meditate. I'm going to have to go for a long walk and then meditate to get my head to calm down after reading this book. That's a bit of a problem. So that is a real problem with this book. But once you get past the buzzing words, if you're wondering why I'm speaking so fast, that's a side effect of this. Because everything is running so fast. I feel like I've had 5 coffees type of buzzing. It really is very uncomfortable. 18th century books are hard enough to read without this elevated language that just takes it over and above. It's just unpleasant. So if I'm running fast, even for me, because I know I do talk fast, that's why. The other thing, once I got past the fact that my brain was aching, the other thing that is really striking is it makes me think about how teenagers and very young people will read books. And a lot of young adult fiction encourages this in a certain way. I mean, look at the Twihard books and Count Crapula in those. Yes, I'm calling him Count Crapula because I'm not naming him his proper name because that's my grandfather's name and I'm not giving my grandfather's name to Count Crapula. But anyway, look at the Twihard books and Count Crapula and the fact that so many people who read them saw them not as massive, great red flags of, this is not how to have a relationship, but, oh, he's so dreamy, he's so mysterious, he's brooding. You know who else is mysterious and brooding? Dracula. Dracula is mysterious and brooding, and it's a better book. It's not a relationship manual, but it's something that is very common for teenagers, especially I think teenage girls. I'm going to throw my own sex under the bus here. Teenage girls, because I can't say that I was immune to this when I was a teenage girl. Look at Her Infernal Majesty's version of Much Ado About Nothing. I've been reading Shakespeare or engaging with Shakespeare. I don't read it so much as I watch it because it's a play. You watch plays. I've been engaging with Shakespeare since I was about 12 or 13. And as a teenager, one of my favourite plays was Much Ado About Nothing, which mostly because of the prettiness of the young man playing Claudio and my entire incredible naivety at being 13 and having, 13 or 14 or 15 and having no concept of how an actual adult relationship is supposed to work, I thought Hero was completely justified in forgiving him and taking him back. Watching it again will I tell you how old I am? No, I don't think I will, but let's suffice it to say, decades later, I watched this again and was like, oh my God, that's bad. Those relationships are terrible. That relationship is terrible. Hero and Claudio are awful. Beatrice and Benedict, that's where it's at. That's where it's at. I did always like them, but I had given a lot more leeway to Claudio because he was pretty. Something you do when you're a teenager, but you grow out of. Arabella is a teenager. The reason her uncle comes after her father dies is because she's not 21 yet. I suspect she's about 16 at the beginning of the novel and about 18 by the end of it, because Mr. Glanville spends some months with her before her father's death, and then there's a year of mourning after her father's death. So she's no more than about 18 by the end of the novel, which is, you know, marriageable age of the 18th century, very much so. Even 16 is considered that. No one bats an eye when Lydia marries at 15. Well, they bat a little bit of an eye, but it's less scandalous marrying at 15 than coming back without being married. But nevertheless, she's very young. And so her immersion into these books is forgivable in one who is very young. But the other thing this makes me think of is the way in which this immersion causes that distortion. It's one thing to naively misunderstand relationships. It's quite another to do, and this is where I have a huge bone to pick with that other big young adult children's book series about the stupid wizard with spectacles. I'm not going to name it because I don't like it. Is that people have so taken that on that you now see people using discourse wherein they compare the villain from that book series to someone like Hitler. Or they compare the bad in that to Nazism. And the problem that I have with that is, A, you're a grown adult, so grow up. I'm sorry, but if you're over 20 and you're comparing Nazism to a stupid children's book, you are in big trouble. You are not understanding the world. Grow up is the first thing that I would say. Second thing that I would say, it's a children's book. Nothing that happens in that children's book happens. You know the beauty of books? You get to the end, and then you go right back to the beginning, and everyone's alive again, because it's a children's book, or it's a book, any book. You know why they benefit from repeated viewing? Because when I watch Richard III and Richard's dead at the end, I go back to the beginning, he's back alive, everyone else springs to life, and we run through. Performance of plays. The reason Titus Andronicus is watchable is because you watch this mayhem and massacre, and then the actors come out and they take their bows, no matter how much they were mutilated or tortured throughout the course of the play. It's fake. And to equate that with somebody who caused some of the most vile atrocities of human history, certainly the most vile atrocities of the 20th century, though, you know, I have a degree in modern history, so, you know, I'm like, okay, so who are we going to put? Yes, Hitler is up there, but so's Stalin, so's Pol Pot. There are a whole load of people who've done absolutely extraordinarily vile things. To equate that with the villain in a children's book is not right. Arabella is doing that sort of thing, but the fact that people are doing that, young adults, sometimes even much older than young adults, is appalling. Fiction is fiction. And we should never lose sight of that, in spite of the fact that we pay attention to it, we play with it, we love it, we engage with it. There is nothing wrong with that, but it should never be given a moral force that is above and beyond actual historical events or real life red flags. Okay? And that's what ultimately is one of the things that I personally got out of this novel, The Female Quixote, is allowing yourself to be so subsumed into a fictional world is not healthy. It doesn't it's forgivable in a child, but once you move into adulthood, you have to let that go. Because if you don't let that go, if you don't let go of that fantasy, you are a grown adult walking around, playing on a soccer pitch with a broom between your legs. I'm sorry, but that is so stupid. So, I do feel that this book has, in spite of the fact that it has too little plot and too many words and left me feeling like I'd had way too much caffeine, it does have a good point. But I think, ultimately, if you want to have a cheats version of this, read up to book 5, then read book 9. Because so little plot actually occurs outside of that you can't pick up from those books, that a lot of it feels very repeating. In fact, the plot is so slim, Wikipedia has about 3 sentences worth of plot. That's what I mean by the fact that the plot is not enough for a book of this size. It's so wordy. There are too many words. And when you realise how many of the words just say nothing in the end, they don't even drive things forward, they just drive confusion, you start to get frustrated with it. So, do I think that it's a worthwhile book to have a look at? Yes. Do I think that it would be for everyone? Absolutely not. So, that is The Female Quixote by Charlotte Lennox. Tell me what you think, if you've read it. I don't think very many people have read it, and I suspect that people who have tried reading it may have given up, because she is such a nitwit. There are other characters in there who are more interesting, who are reasonable and more interesting, but she is such a nitwit. And she's exhausting because of it. Next time I see you, I'm going to bring you something that I am certain I will like, because I like this author and he is funny and succinct. And that is, I'm going to bring you Shamala by Henry Fielding. I'm not sure when I'm going to be back, but Shamala with Henry Fielding. Also, Her Infernal Majesty would like you to know that although she promised to bring you Henry VI, she's changed her mind. So look out for her next week. Anyway, I will see you another time with another book from the Georgian Book Club. Adieu. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.